is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Iron Druid, Book 2, Hexed, by Kevin Hearn. Sponsored by Sue Hayes. In this episode, I do not know. There's a lot that happens, okay? But I do not know how Atticus has the balls to sit in front of somebody who has lost people to demons that were summoned because of him and be like, well, you know, I have my own problems, dude. Atticus. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha, and I'm very excited to be starting this second book in the series. I know that there were a few people actually, Sue commissioned this, and I think that there was a question coming because Candace is assisting me with keeping things straight on the table that keeps track of everything everyone has commissioned so that there's no double bookings. And she had asked me a question about how to enter the second book into the table. And as she was waiting for a response from me, somebody also commissioned the first chapters. So, because of that, I got in contact with them and was like, so that's already been done, but do you want to sponsor the second set of chapters? And they said yes. So the first 2 episodes of this second book are covered already. So that's cool. And yeah, this book is set up. So, you know, I've made a lot of comparisons to the Dresden Files, of course. There's just no way to avoid comparing these. And I feel like that's a very common correlation that people find these books a lot of times because they finished Dresden Files and they're looking for something to scratch that itch now that Dresden Files is up. And the Dresden Files is very different in the way that it handles intros and outros. This book picks up not too long after the last book ended and is really interested in like the repercussions of what happened in the last book immediately being dealt with and talked about and addressed. And that is, the Dresden Files is not like that. He kind of wraps things up at the end of the book in such a way that it feels like that is a complete story. And when you start the next one, you know that there will be, especially as you get further into the series and you realize that nothing happens in this world without there being consequences. You know that consequences will be coming, but you don't know if those consequences are going to relate directly to the previous book or to 2 books ago, because there is so much that happens that doesn't immediately get dealt with. And you're waiting to find out who's going to retaliate, if there's going to be any sort of like comeuppance at all for certain things, if another character that you know didn't die is going to be back, or if they're going to like skip this book. And because this first book was so self-contained in terms of storyline, it's a really straightforward cause and effect. There were a bunch of demons that were released when Angus Og tried to kill Atticus, and those demons were not completely bound when he summoned them the way that he wanted them to be. He did not do a great job. And they escaped, and they are now roaming the world where they should not be. However, the binding that he placed on them is still there. It just didn't work well enough to keep them from flying off immediately. So it's still there, and in the end, they do have to address it before they can continue on doing whatever they want to do. They have to obey the binding to kill Atticus. Even though Angus died, the binding is still there, which I find kind of surprising, but okay. For the sake of this, we'll just go with it. And so when we start this off, Atticus is dealing with a bunch of demons that have come at him, that are not a bunch, but like that there's one that he deals with, and then we find out that there are others that he will have to deal with. So that's one of the things that we start off with. And then there's also like the consequences of him having killed not one, but 2 gods last book. Now, I'm going to offer some criticism here. Having your character kill off 2 gods right out of the gate in the first book, I'm not sure there's any coming back from that. That's a lot. Like, I don't know how you up the ante anymore. And it just feels like the stakes when you're fighting literal gods are so high that starting your book, your whole series with that, I just don't know if I can possibly get worried about Atticus ever again, because he just seems so impossible to kill. And I know that that's supposed to be a perk, but for me, it just feels too easy. There's a combo of the 2 swords that he now has. The fact that he can heal himself almost immediately. Granted, he now has an injury that he can't heal from a demon chewing his ear. And he was able to heal over that scarred area, but he couldn't regenerate a new ear. So there are some wounds that he can't fix. But the practically instant healing, the being able to as we see here, summon elementals to fight on his behalf, the swords, everything combines to make me kind of feel like, well, where are the stakes? Because I'm not concerned about him at all. There's no part of me that ever feels like he's actually in danger in any way. And I don't really know what to do with that, because in some ways that's refreshing in that you can fly through this without getting super, super invested, which is nice for a fluff book. But on the other hand, I want to care and I'm not feeling it. So I'm a little bit worried about how this is going to proceed, if that makes sense. Sue is saying, but they were minor gods. Nevertheless, Sue. Nevertheless. It's a combination here, actually, of feeling like Atticus is overpowered and the gods are not very impressive. So I'm also not really that concerned with them. It's both that he is a little bit too powerful, and so I'm not worried about him. And also, when gods threaten him, I don't believe that they can even do all that much, because apparently they can't. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see how this goes, but when the book starts off with everybody falling all over themselves to try and kind of befriend him or lure him into killing their enemies, that was when I started to realize the full impact of what he had done last book. So, and it's an interesting thing because he talks about how he keeps being told that if he kills some other immortal for some certain god, that god will reward him. And he's really not believing that bit at all, because Bridget had told him that she would reward him if he killed Angus, and then she just fucking disappeared. Which is an interesting thing, because in the in a lot of folklore, when gods or fairies, any supernatural being really make a promise, they're bound to it, really, whether they really intended it to be a promise or not, if they say things in a certain way. So evidently either she is not bound by what she said, she didn't word it the way that she would have had to in order to be bound to it, or she is bound to it and she's planning on paying up at some other point, which I don't think that's the case, because there's no reason for her to not communicate with him about that and tell him that was what was happening. So the fact that he's just pretty much in the dark at this point leads me to believe that she is just ducking him, basically, which is kind of amazing that there's a goddess ducking, but okay. So he then talks about all of the different, and this is kind of fun. The Japanese wanted me to mess with the Chinese and vice versa. The old Russian gods wanted me to stick it to the Hungarians. The Greeks wanted me to knock off their Roman copycats in a bizarre manifestation of self-loathing and internecine jealousy. Am I pronouncing that right? Internecine? The weirdest by far were those Easter Island guys who wanted me to mess around with some rotting totem poles in the Seattle area. But everyone, at least it sure seemed like everyone, wanted me to slay Thor as soon as I had a free moment. The whole world was tired of his shenanigans, I guess. So this leaps into a visit from Vampire Leaf. And Leaf, there's like an amusing little moment where Atticus is trying to tell Leaf exactly how to talk like a regular modern human being so that he doesn't get outed as some weird creature too soon. And Leaf tries to say that, like, well, I've been passing so far, and Atticus is like, not really. Like, everybody has a sort of subconscious sense that there is something wrong about you that makes you not of this time or this place or whatever. And Leaf seems almost insulted by that. Like, I think that he takes it as sort of a, what do you call it? I think he takes pride in a way in fitting in and being undercover successfully. And the fact that he's being told that this is not cutting it, it's just, I don't know. It's a kind of a funny thing that I wonder how I would do at this, because I am somebody who really values good grammar. And I'm somebody who also likes to like take pride in doing things correctly. So I don't know which way I would fall, if I would be able to like smother it, because there's another moment later where Atticus is visited by a Native American and he like takes up that sort of like, what's the word I want? Cadence and manner of speaking. And he does this in order to make the other person feel at home. And he compares this to what he talks about with Leaf here, about like using modern slang and, you know, more contractions and things like this. But it's not really the same. And I found it surprising. And I'm not sure if the author takes this view of things or not. But I found it surprising that he was going to take it upon himself to make this like effort to sound as if he belongs when the man showing up at his place knows that he doesn't belong. Like, this is not the case of you're hanging out with a bunch of human beings who of course will assume that you are also a human being, and so you need to make it seem like you are in with pop culture and talk like a person from the 21st century and whatever. This is the case of somebody who comes from a different culture, showing up at your door, aware that you are a white person and that you are not of their culture, and then you try and talk like them. I don't think this would go over great. I really think that that would be offensive instead of like endearing. And I'm wondering how much the author has actually tested that theory, because this just doesn't seem like how it would go. Like, if somebody came to, you know, my house when my dad was like still really learning English, and he was the only one home, and they acted like they had an accent, that would be totally bizarre and not like, that wouldn't make any sense. Why would you do that? You don't try and fit in with each person that you ever meet in your life by imitating that person. And he compares it with getting pulled over in the South if you have like a Boston accent. Again, not the same thing. The police are pulling you over. They don't know where you're from necessarily, although your license plate might give it away. But they're just going to talk to you and make a snap judgment in that moment from how you speak. That is not the same, again, as a person showing up to your house knowing who you are. Because this guy clearly does. He calls him Druid. Like, he knows all about what Atticus is and who he is and his involvement with this whole thing. So it's like, if you are getting pulled over by cops and you use the same accent, that's fine. That's different. You're trying to fool a cop and make them think that you're a local. Like, fine. But yeah, if you're somebody who is like going to visit a different culture or somebody from that culture is coming to see you and they're very aware of your history, it just makes me feel like if I put myself in the shoes of somebody who is of a, like, really an oppressed culture, a white person imitating me back to me, I would find that really offensive. So I'm letting this slide because of the, like, it being presented here as sort of a given that we're supposed to agree with Atticus, but in principle, I don't, and I don't think this author really has thought this through. So I wanted to address that because that the thing with Leaf is brought up here with his the way that he speaks and is later compared to that, and I don't think they're the same thing at all, and that comparison isn't really, like, valid. So anyway, it turns out that what Leaf wants is for Atticus to kill Thor as well. But basically, it's not exactly, because everybody else is just like, hey, Atticus, you want to do this for me? You want to kill Thor? This one, Leaf is like, I'm going to kill Thor, and I would like your help, please. Which is a little bit different. And he has this, like, vendetta, and we don't know what that's about. And Atticus is, like, asking him just as they get interrupted. But yeah, this is, like, an interesting little thing, because this is the second time we've heard how much he hates Thor. And we still don't know what that's about. And he hates Thor enough to want to kill him, which feels intense. Like, just the idea of wanting to kill a god so much. Like, what did that god do to you? Damn. And when he's talking to Atticus about it, Atticus is, first of all, not super interested in doing this because, frankly, he doesn't have a bone to pick with Thor. Yes, Thor is an asshole. Everybody agrees on this. But there is nothing that he has gotten involved with that makes him personally want Thor dead. The fact that he's already killed 2 gods is kind of drawing a little too much attention to him. Like, he's not super comfortable with the fact that people are all aware that he has done this. And he makes a really good point in saying, if I killed Thor too, like, Thor is a big deal. This is not Angus Og. This is fucking Thor. If I kill him, that is going to make me a threat to every god out there. And they are not going to allow that. Which, he ain't wrong. Good point. So, this whole, like, he really tells Leaf a couple times, dude, no, I'm sorry. No, dude, no, I'm not doing it. And Leaf keeps trying to push it a little bit. And he says, like, Leaf's argument is, maybe you don't have anything against Thor, but so many people do, that if you killed him, or helped to kill him, you would have ample allies to secure whatever aid you needed and plenty of grateful admirers should you succeed. And then they talk about why nobody has done it yet, because of the fact that everyone hates him. It's sort of puzzling that nobody has, like, stepped up and tried this yet. And Leaf says, because of Ragnarok, that prophecy has everyone afraid of him, and it has made him insufferably arrogant. Their line of reasoning says that if he is going to be around for the end of the world, then obviously nothing can be done about him now. But that is poppycock. So, the prophecy, because, like, the prophecy of Ragnarok, the one that I had understood was that Thor was going to either cause it, or at least, as he puts it, just be there. So what he's saying is that everyone just assumes that prophecy is true. They're taking that shit at face value, which I find interesting. And they're assuming that if he is going to be around, then any attempts that they try and make because of this prophecy are obviously destined to fail, because the prophecy says he'll still be alive, so anything that they do is bound to just not work. And Leaf has found sort of not a loophole is the wrong word, a reasoning behind this, for making it, like, making the argument that this may not happen the way that everybody seems to assume it will. Excuse me, my throat is like clogging up. He says, not all of the prophesied apocalypses can come true, just as only one of the creations can possibly be true, if any of them are. We cannot be tied down by some ancient tale dreamed up in the frozen brains of my ancestors. We can change it right now. So that's an interesting thing, that he really believes that there's only one creation that can possibly be true, which I don't necessarily agree with, because I'm a believer in dimensions and different versions of reality and whatever. But he apparently believes in just the one. And that because there are different versions of reality, a prophecy may be true in like another version of reality. So what he's saying, like, I can still see where he's coming from, even though I don't exactly agree with his version of it. But not necessarily be true in our reality. So why don't we at least try to kill Thor? So when he says this, and Atticus is like, listen, that's a valid question. Like, you're bringing up some good points, but this is not on me. I don't want this. I'm not interested. And I'm really lucky that everybody's acting like, oh, you must be really badass to have gotten away from Angus Og. And like, to a degree, yes, it's a lot of like work that I put into spells and all this stuff that kept me alive. But also, it was just luck. Like, there were a lot of factors that came together to make it so that I won. And I can't trust that that's all going to coalesce into this perfect situation for me again. So then he says that there's more than one version of Thor out there right now, which is really crazy. He says, just like there are multiple coyotes and various versions of Jesus and Buddha and Elvis, we can invade Asgard, kill Thor 1.0, and then, if we manage to avoid getting creamed by the rest of the Norse, we could come back here to Midgard only to have the comic book Thor smite the hell out of us like the naughty varlets we are. Did you think about that? Leaf looked utterly bewildered. Thor has a comic book? Yeah, how did you miss this? There's a movie about him based on the comic, too. He's a heroic kind of guy here in the States, not nearly so much of a dick as in the original. He'll ignore you unless you draw attention to yourself, and storming Asgard will probably get his attention pretty fast. And Leaf has an answer for this, too. Say that I can put together a coalition of beings willing to participate in the physical assault on Asgard and accompany us back to Midgard. Could I count on your aid in such a scenario? No, Leaf, I'm sorry. One reason I'm still alive is that I've never gone toe-to-toe with a thunder god. It's a good survival strategy, and I'm going to stick with it. But if you're going to do something like that, I recommend avoiding Loki. He'll pretend to be on your side, but he'll spill his guts to Odin first chance he gets, and then he'll have that entire pantheon coming after you with a wooden stake. That might be preferable to me at this point than continuing to coexist with him. I want revenge. So this is exactly the spot where he starts to ask, Atticus asks, revenge for what exactly? And then all of a sudden his fucking amulet starts to burn. This is like, the idea of having something stuck to you that is burning you is just the worst. I've been rewatching, because I covered the first Sookie Stackhouse book for the book club last month. I have been rewatching True Blood, and I forgot how they have the silver, because in that mythology, vampires are really, it doesn't kill them, but it burns them really badly. It hurts them. It's sort of like with fairies and iron. And they use like silver chains draped over the vampires to like hold them still sometimes. And when characters go to lift it off their skin, it like peels off the layer of skin like it's pulling it away, and there's like the strings of like goo. It's super gross. And that's what I imagine happening with this amulet when it starts to light up. And it's basically that it's overheating because it's working. It's protecting him from somebody who is trying to attack him remotely. So Leaf and Oberon immediately go running out, trying to figure out where the attack is coming from. But they could have saved their breath. saved their fangs. Because Atticus is aware whoever's doing this is not nearby. They're trying to do this from far away. And it really hurts. Like, he has to work very hard to keep his brain under control in the face of this pain. And he can go down to the grass and like use the earth power to heal himself, but it's doing damage faster than he can heal himself at first. So it really does a number on him. Leaf winds up taking off after this because he hasn't eaten yet and he's getting hungry. He mentions the fact that Atticus's pain in the ass across the street neighbor is there. And Atticus, in response to this, decides to summon a bunch of fog to cover up his activities because he is going to heal himself. I don't know why he has to summon fog instead of just going into his backyard to do this, but I guess he wants to do things the hard way. And he sends Oberon over to kind of hassle this guy. I'm going to try and say his name again. Mr. Semergian. I think that's how you say it. Mr. Semergian. He goes and sits like right on the guy's front lawn and stares at him. Or at least on his sidewalk outside of his front lawn. I think he's sitting there just because it's like the exact spot that would unnerve the dude, but he wouldn't technically be able to do anything because the sidewalk is not his property. And he just like waits for this guy's dander to go up. And then when he comes at him with a rolled up newspaper, like growls at him a little bit. They're just fucking like poking and prodding this guy. And I'm going to be honest, this little like unnecessary, like, yes, is Mr. Semergian a pain in the ass? Yes. Has he been wrong about literally anything he's called the cops about, though? No. He just doesn't know what's going on, so he doesn't realize that in a lot of these cases, Atticus is the alleged good guy. But there have been fucking sword fights and crowds of people being murdered on the dude's front lawn. He's not wrong about any of that. And they're just doing this, like, to fucking toy with him, even though, as I said, Atticus could go in the back fucking yard. You've got a huge backyard, dude. You've stored many bodies back there. So he's just doing this to mess with the dude. And it's things like this and like his attitude later with the Native American guy that makes me feel like he is not a character that I can root for wholeheartedly. He's just an asshole sometimes. And it just like it can be endearing if it's peppered through here and there, but it's not peppered. It feels like it's really most of his personality. So I'm going to go on record here saying that I kind of just don't like Atticus. And I find it amusing what he does. And on the face of it, each individual instance of him doing this kind of thing is sort of funny. But as a whole, it all being one person who does all of this, don't think he's that great. And I wish that he had, like, learned more about being a decent human and having some compassion in the thousands of years that he has been alive. But anyway, so he manages to finally, like, heal himself mostly. Uses the hose to, like, cool down the amulet, which is still so hot that he can, like, barely get it unstuck from his skin. And finally, he pulls Oberon away from Mr. Semergian's front lawn, and they're about to walk over to the shop, I think, when Oberon smells demon. And this giant fucking insect that he describes as being about the size of a Volkswagen starts to come at him. And I won't say that he's unsurprised by the appearance of the demon itself, because he was not expecting it. He's definitely surprised, but he's unsurprised that they're still coming after him. Like, in that respect, it all just makes sense. And there's an interesting, because he decides to head home. He wants to get his sword, and he realizes pretty quickly that this thing is moving too fast, and he's not going to get his sword in time. And there's an interesting thing where he talks about earth magic versus demons. The earth is all too willing to help out with getting rid of demons. They don't belong on the earth, are in fact anathema to it. And thus it takes very little coaxing to set up a demonic ward around one's house. Teach the earth to detect a demon's presence upon it and encourage it to tidy up the soiled area, and you're done. Sort of. The problem is that the earth isn't renowned for its reaction times. Every 10 years, I like to meditate for a week and commune with its spirit, which people like to call Gaia nowadays, and she chants fondly about the Cretaceous period, as if it were something that happened just last month. A security-conscious druid cannot afford to take the long view on intruders, however. So I set up my mesquite tree as a first line of defense and as an alarm bell for the elemental of the Sonoran Desert. The elemental would get the Earth's attention much quicker than I could, and perhaps make an appearance as Gaia's champion. The truth was, I didn't exactly know what would happen when a demon woke the Earth's wrath. I was simply betting the Earth would win. Turns out he is correct, the Earth would win. This thing that appears is like a friggin', like, animated octopus, do you hear me? Cactus. But kind of octopi, because he has a bunch of arms and keeps resprouting them when one of them gets cut off, because that's just how cacti work. And the demon at first is just kind of like plowing through the wards, and even when Atticus tries to like hold it in place the way that he did with those bikers, he manages to pull out of it because he's got really narrow, shiny, slippery insect legs that don't get grabbed by the earth the same way. So this thing comes out and just beats the hell out of it and kills it like almost immediately. And then once it's dead, the what is it called? I'm trying to find the exact spot. The elemental doesn't know what to do with it because the demon is not welcome in the earth. It does not want to swallow it. So here comes this crazy idea, which I really enjoy. I offered a suggestion. Encase it all in rock, condense and crush every bit of it down into liquid, and then leave me with a stone keg crafted with a plug near the bottom. I'd give it to some ghouls I knew. Actually, Leaf knew them. He had them on speed dial. They'd have a party with it, because demon juice was like Jägermeister to them. And then they'd return the keg cleaned out and ready to be reabsorbed into the earth. The elemental was pleased with the solution and began to work on it right away. That's rad as hell, and I love it, and I want to see a ghoul party, please. Please. Anybody have fanfiction about a ghoul party where they're drinking demon juice? I would like that, thank you. And fucking Mr. Submergian sees all this. Sees all of it! And offers a friggin' like rocket launcher at one point, which Atticus is like, that will not make a difference. Thanks, though. But yeah, the fact that this dude saw everything and like Atticus was way too busy as he was fighting it to try and shield it from him. He can't like stop in the middle of it to deal with this witness. He just lets the fight happen. And then when Mr. Submergian asks, "What are you?" he says, "Why, I'm the Antichrist, of course." He passes out, and what Atticus decides is that, well, when he wakes up, everything's going to be all cleaned up, and I'll just deny that any of it ever happened. If he tried to get anyone else to believe him, well, they wouldn't. The cut on my shoulder was already healing over. Which, like, I guess, but that is just, like, he's gaslighting. This guy's going to lose his mind. It's a matter of time before this guy just goes nuts, because he's just seen too much. The cognitive dissonance, the fact that nobody's going to be believing him, like, this is just really, it's a rough way to live. And I really kind of feel for Mr. Submergian at this point. I gotta be honest. So, he calls Melina because he thinks that she's the one who tried to kill him because of the fact that they have not yet signed their, like, peace accord treaty. So that this is the perfect time for her to try and kill him because she won't be breaking anything with this attempt. But I really I have to admit, I was surprised that he left to that conclusion. Like, in some ways, his logic makes some sense. But mostly, I'm like, dude, she knows that you survived an attack from Engasog, an attack from, like, she doesn't know how. She hasn't got the details on how this happened, but an attack from, like, the head of her coven. And you made it out on the other side. I really doubt she's going to be trying some, like, remote magic to try and kill you. She's got to know that's not going to work, right? Like, I don't know. So, but anyway, he pretty much immediately realizes his mistake because she answers the phone and says, "You were attacked too, those bitches. Damn them." It makes me wonder who else got hit tonight and who else is dead now. That wasn't the response I expected at all. Wait, what bitches? Who's dead? Melina, who's dead? "You'd better get over here," she said, and hung up on me. So he's about to, like, get ready to go and head over to Melina's when he gets interrupted by this dude at the door. And he is calling from the Dine. I'm not, like, because he calls him Coyote. I'm wondering if there's, like, because is that, like, just his straight up name, just Coyote? But yeah, he's calling from the Dine, he says. And he comes in and tells him about how, listen, I know that sometimes shit is gonna happen. And I recognize that you have gone through some shit recently. But also, this is your responsibility, and there are people dying. So what's happened is that the demons that have been released have just been wreaking havoc. You hear me? I'm saying wreaking havoc instead of wreaking havoc, because that's how fucking what's-his-face, James Marster, says it in the Dresden Files audiobooks, which has driven me crazy for quite some time. And yet here I am saying that shit. I can't believe it. It's rubbing off on me. I'm going to be saying antibiotics soon instead of antibiotics. So he says they're running around here eating people. What do you care if a demon makes mischief in town? What do I care? If a demon went around eating white men like you, you're right, I wouldn't care. But I said they're eating people. And by that I mean they're eating my people, Mr. Druid. My people are feeding a demon that's here because of you, so we have something to talk about, you and I. So, one of them was a kid at a high school who was on lunch, standing outside by herself and got eaten, and nobody saw it because humans couldn't see that one. Huge black thing with wings. It was one of the first creatures out of hell when Angus Og opened the portal, and the first demon to disregard the binding. It was very strong, and since it flew, there was no way I could kill it with cold fire, which required the demon to be in contact with the earth. "So what are you going to do?" Coyote asked. "I'm going to wait," I said. "Eventually it'll come after me here, and when it does, I'll be ready." "Let me suggest a different plan," Coyote said. "You'll go out to that school tomorrow and kill that demon before it kills again. There are more of my people at that school, and I don't want to lose another one because you want to wait." "Why don't you just kill it, Coyote?" "'Cause I ain't responsible for it being here, Paleface. You are. And it's a demon from the white man's religion anyway, so my medicine won't be as strong against it as yours, but I'll help you if I can." "Well, my medicine might not be any stronger. I may be a white man, but this thing don't figure into my religion neither. Besides, I'm awful busy with problems of my own." The fucking gall. Seriously. I cannot. And, like, a couple pages later, Atticus tries to be, like, all sympathetic with it because he makes a joke about how, I bet the priest would just hand out arrows and be like, "Here you go, have an arrow and go kill an Indian." And they, like, sort of laugh and then realize it's a little too close to the truth and stop laughing. And Atticus is like, "Oh, that sucks. The sins of my forebears." And I'm like, no, dude. Your sins, right now, 5 minutes ago. Holy shit, you are the reason that they're here. You decided to pick this fight because you don't want to die. You've been alive for hundreds of human lives span, and you're greedy, and still want more. And so you picked a fight with a fucking god because you decided you were tired of moving, and now they're here because of you and literally dying, and you do not seem to give a shit. I don't like you, Atticus. You're kind of an asshole. You're super selfish, and you don't have much empathy. What the fuck is the matter with you, dude? I mean, honestly, a kid got killed because of this thing. And the first thing that you're thinking is just like, well, I got my own problems. Oh my God. There's no like, wow, oh my, there's no impact. There's no nothing. There's no feeling of responsibility of any kind. Like, dude, how? Is it just that he's lived so long that he doesn't care about human lives the same way? Is that it? Is it just like that it doesn't hit him the same way? If that's so, I want to know. I want to hear that coming from the text. Because otherwise, all it feels like is that he's incredibly self-absorbed and has no regard for human life. And if that's the case, I don't give a shit about him as the good guy. He's not the good guy. The end. So this moment, like the fact that Coyote tells him, he says, and while every single one of us might die in the first fight and maybe the second and third fights too, you know we'll keep coming back. You'll answer to me and to Pima Coyote and to Hono Odoma Coyote and Apache Coyote. How many times can you come back from the dead, Mr. Druid? Me and my brothers can come back all we want, but I reckon we only have to kill you once. Yeah, that's a valid fucking response. That's 100% reasonable. And the whole, like, response that Atticus has to this, too, is telling Oberon to calm down because I may need you. Not thinking, you know what, he's kind of right. Not any sort of reflection, self-awareness, nothing. It's just, I didn't tell him I was awfully tough to kill since the Morrigan had promised never to take me. Still, Coyote could do a lot of damage I might never recover from, as my mangled right ear testified. I just wanted to know how serious he was about this, and now I had my answer. I just wanted to know how serious he was about this. What? Why does he have to be serious? Why aren't you serious? What the fuck, dude? Oh, I'm so irritated. So finally, he's like, alright, well, I'll do it, but like, can you get me a ride? Oh my God, call an Uber. Atticus, Jesus, this is your fucking problem, guy. So mad right now. He's just being like, Okay. So here comes the arrow joke. I think I know where we can get us some holy ones, some demon slaying arrows. You do? I ain't never seen any for sale in any of those Catholic churches, Coyote said. When were you ever in any Catholic church? I asked incredulously, and Coyote started to laugh. It was an infectious laugh, the kind you cannot help but smile at. I mean, how would you know, right? They could be passing out holy arrows with their Jesus crackers, and you'd never know any different. Coyote hooted and hollered and howled his laughter, and it wasn't long before I was doing the same. He doubled over, he slapped his thighs, he laughed silently for a while because he was out of breath. He laughed until he had tears streaming from his eyes. I bet it was just like that, Mr. Druid, Coyote finally managed to gasp. Then priests would come up on the soldiers and say, in the name of the Father and the Son, here's a cracker, now go kill some fucking Indians. And abruptly, the laughter died in our throats and our smiles fell quietly like death shrouds on the fallen. It was simply too close to the truth to be funny. We spent some small while staring down at the flower bed in front of my porch. I cannot speak for what Coyote was thinking, but personally I was haunted by the ghosts of those who had trespassed against me. I was the only survivor of the Holy Roman Church's war against Druidry. Oh, okay, you know what? I take it back. I said that he acted like he was trying to have some empathy later. But no, he wasn't. He wasn't even thinking about the Native Americans. He was thinking about himself and the Druids and the way that they were attacked by the Romans and not about the way that they... Oh, cool. Okay. Jesus Christ. He is so incredibly self-absorbed, I can't. Okay, moving on. So... he agrees that he's going to do his duty, fucking finally, and then he goes to visit Melina. He stops on the way to visit Melina, to Gran's place. And that's what I call Grenwell. Gren, whatever. Because I can't pronounce her name. So Gran answers the door, and she is wearing this, like, nightie, and he pretty much cannot handle it at all. And, like, accidentally says the word tits when he's looking up. There's some titillating wallpaper up there. Yes, fantastic interior decorating here, I just noticed. And she's like, what are you talking about? You've seen this before. And I'm like, okay, listen. A woman who looks like she looks is not going to be fooled by any of this. And this is being written as if she's really, like, not clued in on how foolish she is being. And she 100% would know exactly what was going on in his head, because she's wearing a nightie, and the whole scene just, like, is super irritating. And Druid's log, November 1. Buy attractive apprentice some shapeless, ugly clothes as soon as possible. Maybe convince her to shave her head as well. Tell her all the cool Druid initiates are doing it. All right. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, because y'all know how I feel about this already. And this is not just here, but also in the Dresden Files, and I'm just over it. So I'm going to move right along here. She lives in the same building, the same condo building as Melina, which I had forgotten, because, like, that was how her head got infected with that witch. And Melina, she has this, like, whole setup, which we find out later. He puts, luckily, some bindings on himself so that all of his hair and skin stays with him and does not get sucked into anything or taken by anybody. And he points out that 9 floors up, I had a limited supply of energy from which to draw, just what was stored in my bear charm, because it was disconnected from the earth. I can't really sling magic around the way witches can in any case. In a situation like this, my sword would serve me better. Fraggle Rock wasn't simply a sharpened piece of steel. The Tuath de Danann had given it a couple of bonus utilities when they forged it ages ago, and I intended to employ one of them now. So, here's when he uses a basically truth spell on her. So, she answers the door with red eyes and is very upset because one of her coven has died from alleged spontaneous combustion. And when, like, he had expected her to answer the door, maybe, like, threatening him or doing something, but she's just, like, so grieved that she's almost not really, like, even aware of the threat that he could pose at this time. Like, she's just, I think, assuming that they're on the same side since he was just attacked. And he says, "Forgive me, but I need 2 questions answered first. I moved my sword into view, but did not raise it or threaten her with it. Will you answer?" Melina's eyes flicked down. "If I answer incorrectly, then I get the sword?" I'm like, what? What does that mean? Oh, then I get the sword, like, if I answer correctly, you'll kill me with the sword? Oh, damn, this bitch took it to 11. He says, "No, the sword makes sure you answer correctly. It's kind of special that way." Melina narrowed her eyes. "What sort of questions?" "Nothing about your coven's secrets, nothing personal. They regard my immediate safety only." "Do I get a quid pro quo?" "I freely tell you I have no intention of attacking you without being attacked first." "I already knew that. I want to know about your magic." "No, that is not a quid pro quo." I shook my head. "The value is not the same." "You are suggesting that innocent questions about your magical abilities are more important than questions of your immediate safety?" "Of course, for the answer to the latter will do me no good past this evening, and the former will inform you forever." "I am too upset to enjoy fencing with you about this. Ask your questions about personal safety." So he uses this thing, and it envelops her head in a soft cloud of cyan light. The witch blinked. "Did you have anything to do with the attempt on my life tonight, or do you have any knowledge of who might have been involved?" "I personally had nothing to do with it, nor did any of my coven, but I do have knowledge of who might have been involved." Do you or any other person, creature, or spirit within your home intend to cast any spell on me while in the building, or are there enchantments that I may unknowingly trigger during my visit? That's good thing he added that second part. Neither I nor any other person, creature, or spirit in my home intends to cast a spell on you. I do not wish to tell you about our enchantments, for I feel that intrudes uncomfortably into the area of coven secrets which you promised not to explore. Melina frowned for a moment and then continued, her eyes widening as she realized she could not stop herself. But of course you tripped an enchantment the moment you walked into the building, as all non-residents do, a simple low-level alert, and another that identified you as carrying a magical item, and then another in the hallway that... And she tries to stop answering, and tries to close the door, and she tries to do all sorts of stuff to keep herself from having to answer the question. But in the end, she finally does have to. The hallway has an enchantment that removes a few hairs from your head if you do not live on this floor. Crossing the threshold of my door will do the same thing. There is a knife in my kitchen that will slice into your fingers if you try to use it, thereby producing blood we may seize upon. And if you use our bathroom, your waste will be stored for later use. Ew, gross, I said. That is all. Release me from this spell now. I have promised to ask you only 2 questions regarding my safety, and that is what I have done. The fact that you did not want to answer the second question demonstrates I had good cause to be worried. And of course, you did not want to answer, because you know that possession of my hair, blood, or any fragment of my cells for magical purposes is expressly forbidden in the non-aggression treaty we have yet to sign. Melina seethed quietly, and I continued. I am going to release you shortly. Before I do, I want you to know I hold you and your coven blameless in the recent attempt on my life. I'm not going to ask you any more questions now, for that would violate my promise, but I would appreciate it very much if once you are released, you would share what you know about who tried to kill me. If the party responsible for attacking me is the same party that killed Waclaw, then I offer my aid in avenging her. The witch's expression softened minutely, and after a brief hesitation she gave me a curt nod. That is reasonable. I will return any hair taken from you immediately and dispel the enchantment on my threshold so that you may enter safely. But you will never use the sword's power on me again, nor on any member of my coven. I didn't nod or give any other sign that I agreed to that, but instead released her and said, "Let us proceed then." So that's interesting to me, that he doesn't actually say, "Yeah, all right, deal." He just it's like, let's get on with it. So I'm wondering how binding that is exactly. Sue, I just saw your response to how her head got infected with that witch. What a fantastic sentence. Yeah, that is a weird way to say that. I didn't really think of it when I blurted it out. He comes in and, I like that it's decorated in lots of purples and blacks, because that feels like kind of my jam. If I wasn't so in love with pink, as anybody who is in the Crowdcast can see, I'm literally wearing hot pink, as there are hot pink accessories behind me. I would definitely go with a purple and gray and black scheme, which I'm thinking of doing in my bedroom anyway. So witches, I feel you. And I think custom demands that I offer you refreshment, but you won't take any, will you? No, but I thank you for the thought. It is a meaningful gesture in itself. So she asks him to sit down, and he does not want to sit down. And he says that he's going to keep his sword drawn as well, and she's kind of offended that he won't sit and is going to keep his sword drawn the entire time. So finally she, decides to drink straight out of the bottle instead of on coy and pouring herself a glass of wine, and she's drinking while they're talking. And she says that the hex that was used on him and on Waclaw is not a hex that her coven can do or that they would want to do. She says this hex cannot be cast without the aid of dark powers, and it takes 3 witches in tandem to cast it. That should give you an idea of what we're confronted with. If I was targeted at the same time as the rest of your coven, it means we're dealing with 24 witches plus 8 demons. Correct. Well, The demons may not still be around, but I'm sure they left something of themselves behind. Her eyes grew round significantly, and I began to wonder how much wine she had already consumed. Oh, no. Let me guess. 8 of those witches are eating for 2 now. Very good, Mr. O'Sullivan. That's generally how these things work. In 9 months, 8 demon babies will be born, and more soon after if the witches care to try again. There's only one coven large enough and soulless enough to try this, and we have run into them before. They call themselves, and she says something, Die Tochter des Dritten Hauses, the daughters of the third house. They are the bitches I was referring to on the phone. Her face twisted and she looked as if she was going to scream a curse or 5, but she mastered her temper in time and instead observed calmly, I see you speak German. Ja, several versions of it. Why did you survive when Waclawa did not? Melina shrugged. She was outside when it happened. The rest of us were at home. Here on our floor we are very well protected, as I'm sure you are protected somehow. Had we all been outside at the time of the attack, we'd all be dead. If that's so, then you'd think they would have timed the attack better to ensure more of you were vulnerable. You are assuming they're aware of our defenses. They have no conception of the wards the Zorias provide us. Their magic is as different from ours as it is from yours. To their way of thinking, they've cast a hex no one can survive. They will be surprised to learn otherwise. Why was I targeted? Why were you targeted, for that matter? They targeted us particularly, partially, to settle an old score. She says, like, I don't think that does she get into this really? But mostly, we are all that's left protecting the East Valley, whether you realize it or not. And so they want the East Valley, apparently. And when he asks about the werewolves or Leaf the vampire, she's like, oh, they're not, like, the influence that they have is totally different than what you and I do, like dealing with human beings on the regular. And the magic doesn't touch the werewolves at all. So, like, there's no point worrying about them. And she says, look at places with high crime, the West Valley as opposed to the East Valley, for example. The West Side cities, including Phoenix, have higher rates of crime, poverty, and auto accidents than the East. Why do you suppose that is? Socioeconomic status and poor civil engineering? No, it's because the West Valley is not under our aegis like the East is. You are suggesting that your coven is solely responsible for the East Valley's relative peace and prosperity. Not solely, but largely. The Zorias are protective goddesses, not the vengeful sort that wants blood and sacrificing. Yeah, that's fascinating. But hardly germane to the point, which is where can I find this German coven and how do I kill them? Kill them the way you killed my sisters, Melina said coldly. She didn't know that I hadn't really killed any of them. 5 had been werewolf snacks, and the 6th had fallen prey to another witch, one who was on my side. As for where they are, I imagine they are in town somewhere. I cannot give you a precise location because I do not know myself. We will attempt to divine their location after midnight. So she really believes that that coven is more powerful than hers, and that they are probably, like, in the East Valley for a little while because they assume that they are going to win, and they're basically starting to move in now. And points out the fact that if it's a hex, and this is not something that I have thought of, but I'm wondering about Atticus's pendant, the sigil that he has on his necklace. The fact that it's a hex means that they can't individually protect themselves, and that they can't leave the floor that they're on of their building that's protected, because it's like an ongoing thing. At the same time, we are unlikely to defeat them solely by magic with only 6 of us. So it is up to you to go out and thwart them if you can. So, he asks why East Valley is so desirable. And she says it's, first of all, easier to blend in because most people don't believe in magic here. So it's going to be simple to bamboozle them because they don't want to believe. You can go where you wish with relative ease. A larger group needs a larger herd to hide in, and larger economic engine to afford us the life we'd prefer to live. And we can share, but when too many magic users populate a given area, the risk of exposure increases, as does the risk of overtaxing the economics. I beg your pardon. How exactly do you overtax the economics? I run a bookstore and apothecary shop. All members of the Temp Pack have legitimate jobs. Don't you do the same? Why, no, Mr. O'Sullivan, I don't. People give me everything I want. The same goes for my sisters. You mean people just give you money? Yes, that's right. Of their own free will? Well, that's how they remember it, so it must be true, mustn't it? She smirked wryly. And you have no moral problem with that? None whatsoever. Actually, we are on the payrolls of 24 different companies as consultants, but we do absolutely nothing for our paychecks, just like normal consultants. We do, however, provide a service to the people of the East Valley. We keep it free of truly nasty witches as well as some of the less savory citizens of America. There are parts of Mesa that could easily become like the dangerous parts of big cities if it weren't for us. And that's what happens if that coven takes over this territory. Not to mention the damage that the Bacchants can do once they get here. The Bacchants. Oh, shit. They are not to be fucked with. And I knew this like before even reading his thing, because he says to himself that he has to try really hard to keep a straight face and not wet his pants. Back when I was an initiate, Bacchants were the scariest creatures in the world. Anything that could scare the Archdruid damn well gave me nightmares. I nearly shat chyme whenever Bacchus was mentioned, even obliquely, for the first few centuries. Kids today don't know much about Bacchants, except perhaps for the story about Orpheus told in Ovid's Metamorphoses. I had an ASU student looking for it in my shop last week, and he defined the Bacchants for me as those drunk chicks who killed that one dude because he wouldn't have sex with them. I asked him if he knew what Maenads were, and instead of correctly answering that it was just another name for Bacchants, he bizarrely thought I was referring to my own testicles. That conversation deteriorated quickly after that. Now that I'm much older and hopefully wiser, I know that the Archdruid's fear was partially his own chauvinist terror of women who did whatever they wanted. I like that point is made. But I also know that it was partially well-founded. Bacchants carry around thyrsi, which are staves wrapped in ivy leaves that give them the power to throw an instant party. Slap the ground with them, and wine bubbles forth. They dance and drink themselves into a frenzy, and then they acquire tremendous strength sufficient to rip apart a bull, or a man, with their bare hands. As a corollary, their frenzy tends to have a ripple effect on people around them, turning fairly civilized parties into orgies of debauchery. It isn't the sort of magic that specifically targets anyone, and I suspected much of it had to do with simply stimulating human pheromones, so I feared my amulet wouldn't protect me from it. Ooh, shit. That's a really interesting thing, and I'm very curious to see that tested out. In addition to this, Bacchants are not burned by fire, and they cannot be harmed by iron weapons. The former didn't really apply to me because druids don't go around chucking fireballs at their enemies, but the latter presented me with a huge problem since I basically used my sword whenever I wanted to do unto others before they did unto me. Bacchants were therefore well protected against the talents of druids, while I feared myself defenseless against their magic. Yikes! So that's a bummer. So she tries to present that the witches and the Maenads are trying to work together to take over the territory. And he says, oh, okay, so what this boils down to is that you just really want me to run around and take care of all of your problems because you can't leave this floor of your apartment. And that just seems a little bit too easy to me. I'm not your errand boy, and that's not what I'm doing. And he's like, yeah, I will help with Waclaw and avenging her. But what does your coven plan to do to fight the Hexen? So first we have to find them, is her point, which is tonight's divination. That's what they're going to do. And And when the Bacchants get here, most likely tomorrow night, I'll let you know where they are as well. Then I suppose there's nothing left to discuss except whatever you have of mine that you really shouldn't. And she says that, like, as she's getting up to deal with that and giving back his hair and blood or skin cells or whatever, that she actually is looking forward to signing the accords, that she wants to be able to work with him and not have this kind of level of suspicion hanging over them, which he doesn't really buy. Like, he's like, yeah, that's nice words and everything, but I get that you're just being as diplomatic as you possibly can. So then he describes the workspace for the witches, which is amazing. In the center of the room was a wooden work table bought from IKEA's kitchen department. It supported the obligatory mortar and pestle, a knife for chopping, a peeler for tubers, and an electric hot plate. I was vaguely disappointed to see she had a regular saucepan resting on the hot plate rather than a black iron cauldron, and even more disappointed that there wasn't a hapless amphibian in there. A smaller copy of the large painting in the living room hung opposite the work table. The three Zorias watched from the walls, waiting to bestow their blessings on Melina's work. So then they talk about herbs and where she gets them, and she is asking him if he can supply some bloodwort and things. And there's a nice little moment of, like, let there be commerce between us, so they can sort of, like, support one another. And there's this moment of him noticing all of the locks of hair that are in jars and realizing that every single one of those people is under her power and that they have no idea, which is pretty messed up. Like, yikes. I hope there's a way to take care of that at some point. She pointed to the labeled jar next to the empty one. Inside was a lock of sandy hair, emblazoned on the label in purple ink was the name of Kyle Jeffert. Your hair should have been deposited in this empty bottle here, she said, then looked up to the air vent through which her air conditioning was softly blowing. Presumably, any hair collected from visitors in the hallway got routed through the ductwork to land in the empty bottles, but nary a red hair from my head was to be found on any of them. What in the name of Zoria Utranyaya is going on? Melina scolded the bottle as if it would answer her, and I fought to keep a smile off my face. Ha ha, my personal binding was stronger than her enchantment. Neener, neener, Melina, you can't catch me. And that is the end of chapter 5. So, in summary, I'm enjoying the story, and I pretty much like everybody better than Atticus. And you know what? That's fine. If I'm comfortable with that position, I'm going into it knowing that, and I think that's a good way to approach things, is like deciding I can root for the bad guys here. If they lose, that's fine, but it will, because I don't really feel worried about Atticus anyway, rooting for him seemed just sort of like like not even a given, that's the wrong word. Rooting for him felt unimportant. I don't have to root for him. He's going to be fine. I know this. So instead, rooting for the other guys, because I don't really like Atticus, will be much more interesting, I think. So that's how I'm going to approach this one. Unless he surprises me with a sudden, like, you know. But he says something to her about, like, oh, don't you have any moral qualms about that with what she's doing? And I'm just like, dude, you don't get to even ask anybody that question. Stop it. Nope. So yeah, that's it. And the next episode is going to be, it's, I think, over a week away at this point. So somebody may commission one earlier, we'll see. And if they check those charts, I can rearrange things. But for right now, it'll be a little while before the next one. But it is coming, so just stay tuned. Sue is in the chat here, so I just wanted to ask Sue if there was anything that you wanted to ask me before I wrapped this sucker up. But I'm going to... I'm trying to think exactly how, because there's like a lot of people who have been asking about what other book series are sort of fluffy and remind me of this, and I'm going to have to brainstorm that, because some people like found out about this series, got into it right away, and already tore through all of them. I cannot relate. I don't get to do that almost ever. But if any of you listening know of another series that kind of reminds you of this one, and specifically people were asking for fluff, let me know. And I'm going to try and do a sort of like recommendations. If you liked this, then maybe you'll like that on the chart for planning things. And also, reminder, if anybody is interested in commissioning stuff, to double check the book club too, because I had somebody yesterday commission a book that I have already covered for the book club, but did not do chapter by chapter, and they had forgotten to check that. So it was, I had to do a refund, and they're going to be choosing something else. But what do you think of Oberon? He's my favorite character. Yeah, Oberon's pretty fun. Oberon, like, honestly, for me, is like the real good guy here, because I don't like Atticus, and I don't think Atticus even deserves Oberon. So that's where I stand on that. Is Oberon is probably like the best creature so far in this series, in terms of like purity of intent, which I think makes sense. The dog should be, right? Food and bitches. And that's about it. All right, everybody. Well, I'm going to say farewell. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you again to Sue for commissioning this. And I'm excited to read the next 5 chapters. See you soon. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.